wind tears at the merchant's cloak. He stands on the rocky shore, salt spray stinging his face. The Mediterranean churns gray and violent beneath a lead sky. It is late spring, somewhere between the years 42 and 45 in the Common Era. The Roman Empire controls these waters. The Roman Empire controls everything. But this boat, this small, battered boat with no sail, no oars, no rudder, does not belong to Rome. The merchant's name is lost to us. His diary survived. The boat survives too. In the stories mothers tell their daughters across 2,000 years. He watches the vessel lurch toward the beach. It should not still be floating. The wood is split. The hull rides too low in the water. He can see figures inside. Women, he thinks, clinging to the gunwales. One of them is dark-skinned, her head wrapped in cloth that whips in the wind. Another has her arm around an older woman who seems barely conscious. The boat hits the shore with a grinding crack. The merchant runs toward them. His sandals sink into the wet sand. Behind him, his cart of olive oil and wine sits abandoned on the coastal road. Nothing in his 30 years of trading, not pirates, not storms, not the mad Emperor Caligula's taxes, has prepared him for what he sees when he reaches that boat. The women are speaking a language he does not fully understand, Hebrew mixed with Aramaic. One word he recognizes. They keep saying it over and over as they stumble onto Gallic soil, Jerusalem. The youngest woman, she cannot be more than 20, falls to her knees in the sand. She is weeping. Her hands are shaking as she scoops up the gray Camargue earth and lets it run through her fingers. The dark-skinned woman kneels beside her, whispering something the merchant cannot hear, but he sees their eyes. He has seen those eyes before, in the faces of fugitives fleeing the arena, slaves escaping the mines. These are the eyes of people who have watched their world burn. He opens his mouth to ask where they came from. Before he can speak, the youngest woman looks directly at him. Her face is gaunt, sunburned, streaked with dried tears, but her gaze is steady. "Water," she says in broken Latin. "Please, water." The merchant nods. He runs back to his cart. His hands fumble with the wineskin. When he returns, more villagers have gathered on the beach. They stare at the impossible boat, at the impossible women, at the impossible fact that anyone could survive the open sea in such a vessel. The merchant hands the wineskin to the youngest woman. She drinks, then passes it to the others. The dark-skinned woman drinks last, her eyes never leaving the tree line, as if she expects soldiers to emerge at any moment. "Who are you?" the merchant finally asks. The youngest woman wipes her mouth. She looks at the small crowd of Gallic fisherfolk and traders gathering around them. She seems to be making a decision. "We knew him," she says quietly, "the one they crucified. In Jerusalem, we knew him." The merchant feels the world tilt, because everyone in the empire has heard the rumors. A Jewish prophet, a man who claimed to be the son of their god, executed for sedition 3 years ago, maybe 4. The stories say his followers scattered. The stories say Rome is hunting them down. The stories never said they would wash up here, on the wild coast of Gaul, on a boat that should not have survived the journey. To understand what the merchant claimed to witness that day, we must first understand what historians and archaeologists have pieced together about one of the most enduring legends in European Christianity. The story appears in texts dating back to the 9th century, though oral traditions in Provence claim it is far older. According to the legend, after the crucifixion of Jesus Christ around 3033 CE, his followers faced brutal persecution in Jerusalem. In the chaos following the Jewish revolt, a group of women, described in various accounts as Mary Magdalene, Mary Salome, Mary Jacob, and their servant Sarah, were forced onto a boat without provisions and set adrift in the Mediterranean. It was meant to be a death sentence. The legend states they drifted for days, possibly weeks, before landing on the southern coast of Gaul, in the region we now call the Camargue in Provence, France. The exact location, according to tradition, is the town now known as Saints Maries de la Mer, literally, St. Mary's of the Sea. Now here is where history and legend blur together in fascinating ways. While scholars debate the historical accuracy of this specific landing, several pieces of evidence have kept this story alive in academic circles. First, there are the Gnostic Gospels, particularly the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. discovered in Egypt in the 19th century, which depict Mary Magdalene as a central figure in early Christianity, not a peripheral character, but a leader. Second, archaeological evidence confirms that early Christian communities did exist in southern France by the late 1st century, far earlier than previously thought. Third, and perhaps most intriguingly, there is a persistent oral tradition among the Romani people of Europe that traces their connection to this region back to Saint Sarah the Egyptian, who is venerated as their patron saint. The merchant's diary itself is a matter of scholarly debate, a document that surfaced in the archives of the Abbey of Saint Victor in Marseille in the 12th century purports to be a copy of a much earlier Greek text written by an anonymous merchant who witnessed the landing. The manuscript describes the arrival of holy women from Judea in extraordinary detail. Their clothing, their dialect, even the condition of their boat. Medieval historians preserved it, Renaissance scholars studied it. Modern researchers remain divided. Some experts argue it is a medieval fabrication, created to legitimize Provence's claim to apostolic origins. Others point to linguistic details in the text, specific Aramaic phrases, descriptions of 1st century Judean clothing, knowledge of Mediterranean sailing conditions. It would have been difficult for a medieval monk to fabricate convincingly. The debate continues. What we know for certain is this: by the 4th century, Christian pilgrims were already visiting the Camargue coast, claiming it as a sacred site. By the 6th century, a church had been built there. By the Middle Ages, the pilgrimage to Saint Mary's de la Mer reveled Santiago de Compostela in importance. In 1448, during excavations beneath the church, workers discovered a collection of bones. King Ren of Anjou, who was present, declared them to be the relics of Saints Mary Salome and Mary Jacob. In the crypt above, they found darker bones, which tradition identified as those of Sarah. Today, those relics remain in the church, drawing hundreds of thousands of pilgrims annually. But let us return to the merchant's account, because whether it is historical record or sacred literature, the document contains one of the most haunting passages in early Christian writing. According to the diary, the merchant provided the women with shelter in a small fishing village. For several days, he observed them. He notes that the youngest woman, implied to be Mary Magdalene, spent hours each day writing in scrolls she had brought with her. She was, he writes, composing a testimony of all she had witnessed. Those scrolls, if they existed, have never been found. The merchant describes how the local Gauls, though wary at first, began to gather around the women, not for miracles, not for healings, but for stories. The women spoke of a man who had told them that the kingdom of God was not in temples or palaces, but within each person. They spoke of a teacher who had eaten with tax collectors and prostitutes, who had elevated women as disciples, who had challenged the authorities so thoroughly that both the religious establishment and the Roman Empire wanted him dead. The oral tradition of Provence, passed down through generations of fisherfolk and farmers, the merchant is said to have written one particular sentence that captures the essence of that moment. They brought no gold, no armies, no power. They brought a story, and somehow that was enough. The boat that should not have survived still echoes through time. Every May 24th, the streets of Saint Mary's de la Mer flood with pilgrims. Romani families travel from across Europe to honor Sarah, carrying her statue from the church crypt down to the very beach where legend says she first touched French soil. They waded into the Mediterranean, holding the statue above the waves, recreating the arrival that happened, or might have happened, 2,000 years ago. The Church of Saint Mary's de la Mer still stands, its fortified walls dark against the Camargue sky. In the crypt, you can see the relics. In the upper chapel, weathered paintings depict a landing, the boat, the women, the merchant on the shore. But perhaps the most powerful echo is not in the churches or the pilgrimages. It is in the questions the story forces us to ask. What must it have been like to be a woman in the 1st century, watching your teacher executed, your community scattered, your future erased? What kind of courage does it take to step onto a boat with no sail, no provisions, no hope, and choose the uncertainty of the sea over the certainty of Roman persecution? The merchant's diary, whether authentic or apocryphal, preserves something true. The moment when an empire's refugees became a region's saints. The moment when the Mediterranean, that great divide between civilizations, became a bridge. Historians may never agree on whether Mary Magdalene actually landed in Gaul. Archaeological digs may never uncover definitive proof of the boat. The merchant may be a literary creation, his diary a pious fiction, but stand on that beach in the Camargue. Feel the wind that still tears at your clothes just as it did 2 millennia ago. Watch the waves crash against the shore, where someone, refugee, saint, or both, might have stumbled onto the sand and whispered a prayer of thanks. The story survives because it speaks to something deeper than historical fact. It speaks to the power of survival, the dignity of the displaced, the radical idea that the most important stories in history are not always told by emperors and generals, but by merchants and fishermen who happened to be standing on a beach when the impossible came ashore. The boat is gone. The merchant is dust. The empire that hunted them collapsed 15 centuries ago, but every year they carry Sarah's statue into the waves. And the Mediterranean, indifferent and eternal, keeps bringing the past to our shores.